A rich guy chained the animal on top of an ant nest in broad daylight, and the scene shocked everyone around. But what happened next totally flipped the script in the most unexpected way. Watch until the end and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next in this story. Matthew Anderson Wilson never knew what scarcity was, much less limits. Born in New York, the only son of one of the biggest entrepreneurs in American agribusiness, he grew up surrounded by private drivers, international schools, and vacations in exclusive destinations. His triplex apartment on the Upper East Side was just one of many properties his surname boasted across the country. For Matthew, money was a universal solution, a passport that opened any door, broke any rule. At 28, with a business degree from an American university and a minority partner in his father's businesses, Matthew maintained a carefully constructed image on social media. Sometimes a visionary entrepreneur, sometimes a cool bon vivant, always surrounded by equally rich and carefree friends. There was no room for weaknesses or deep emotions in his universe of parties in the Hamptons and meetings in climate-controlled rooms in Midtown. It was during lunch at the Gramercy that his father, Arnold Wilson, a man of few words and many properties, handed him the documents for a ranch in rural Texas. "It's yours now," he said dryly, as if handing over a car key. "New Horizon Ranch. Almost 7,000 acres, most of it already productive. Elite cattle, some quarter horses. The annual profit is in the reports." Matthew leafed through the documents with moderate interest. He had never been truly interested in the rural side of the family business. He preferred financial assets, real estate development, anything that could be managed from an air-conditioned office. "Why are you giving me this now?" "Because you need to understand where the money you spend comes from," replied Arnold, cutting a piece of filet mignon. "And because it's past time you learn to manage something concrete, not just papers." 2 weeks later, Matthew was flying over the lands of his new property in a private helicopter. From up there, he saw well-divided pastures, an imposing main, house by a pond, organized corrals and barns that seemed newly built. For him, this was just another extension of the family empire, another line on the resume, perhaps a new location for Instagram photos. Cattle rancher would sound good in his biography. Upon landing at the improvised helipad near the main house, he was greeted by a group of visibly anxious employees. At the front of the group, a middle-aged man with sun-weathered skin and military posture. "Welcome, Mr. Matthew. I'm Samuel Green, manager of New Horizon Ranch for almost 20 years. Matthew adjusted his sunglasses and offered a quick handshake while analyzing the surrounding structure. The main house was larger than he had imagined, a restored colonial construction with wide porches and an exuberant garden. In the distance, he could see the corrals and stalls organized in a horseshoe shape. "We've prepared lunch for you. Afterwards, if you'd like, we can take a tour of the property," continued Samuel, leading him toward the house. Matthew noticed that some employees observed him with curiosity, while others kept their eyes down, in a deference that mixed respect and apprehension. He was used to this kind of treatment. After all, he was the boss now. Lunch was served on the porch by a woman with skillful hands, who placed on the table an abundance of typical dishes: cowboy rice, ranch-style beans, roasted pork loin, buttered squash, sautéed greens, corn pudding, and to finish, a homemade caramel custard that made Matthew repeat dessert. "Mrs. Sophia has been cooking here since your grandfather's time, sir," explained Samuel. "Nobody makes a custard like she does." The woman smiled shyly while collecting the plates. During the tour of the property, Matthew maintained a studied indifference. Samuel proudly showed each sector of the ranch, explaining in detail about the cattle lineages, silage production, and the genetic improvement program started a decade ago. Matthew mechanically agreed, checking messages on his phone whenever possible. For him, this was just a big business, not a passion as it seemed to be for the manager. However, his disinterest was momentarily interrupted when they passed through, a sector apart from the others, where some individual stalls housed quarter horses. "This is the training and recovery area," explained Samuel. "Some of these animals are worth small fortunes, sir. That chestnut over there," he pointed to a robust horse, "has already given us more than 20 regional championships." Matthew observed the animals with newfound interest. Horses had always seemed like nobler creatures than cattle to him, more elegant and worthy of attention. "And that one in the back, why is it isolated?" he asked, noticing a large animal in a stall separate from the others. Samuel hesitated briefly. "That's Thunder. He was the best stallion on this ranch for many years, won prizes all over America. Your father has a special fondness for him, but he's old now and had a serious injury to his hind leg a few months ago." Matthew approached the stall where the animal remained almost motionless. It was a black horse with a small white mark on its forehead. Despite the evident debility, something in its posture still conveyed dignity. Its eyes, however, seemed dull, as if pain had consumed their brightness. "He's treated by Dr. Camilla, our veterinarian. She comes twice a week to do physical therapy and apply medication. It's a long treatment, but we're seeing progress," explained Samuel, with evident pride in the dedication to the animal. Matthew observed the horse for a few moments, trying to calculate the cost of that treatment versus the return that an animal in that condition could offer. "How long until he recovers completely?" he asked, with business pragmatism. "Well, sir, Dr. Mitchell says that in about 6 more months he might walk normally again, but he'll never be a competition or breeding animal again." "Then what's the purpose of keeping him?" inquired Matthew, genuinely confused. "If he won't compete or reproduce, why spend on treatment?" Samuel seemed disconcerted by the question. "Well, sir, it's Thunder. He served the ranch for more than 10 years. Your father always said he deserved a dignified retirement." Matthew nodded, but his calculating gaze was already evaluating the area occupied by the animal, the resources dedicated to it, the time of the employees. In his mind, that horse represented a waste of money, a sentimentality that had no place in an efficient operation. At night, alone in the office of the main house, reviewing the ranch's numbers and drinking an aged whiskey he had found in the bar, Matthew was already developing plans to optimize resources. New Horizon Ranch had the potential to be much more profitable, he thought. It would be enough to eliminate waste, such as that useless horse that occupied space and consumed resources. Matthew's first week as owner of New Horizon Ranch was marked by abrupt changes. He fired 3 employees he considered unproductive, cut benefits such as monthly food baskets, and implemented a system of goals that left the team in a constant state of tension. For him, this was just efficient management. For the workers, it was the beginning of a period of uncertainty. Wednesday morning dawned with a typical Texas mist when Matthew called a meeting with the entire team. Among those present was Camilla Mitchell, the young ranch veterinarian who maintained a serious expression while observing the new boss. "From today, any veterinary treatment that exceeds $500 will need my express authorization," he announced, scanning the team with his gaze. "We will no longer spend money on sentimentality." After the meeting, while walking with Samuel toward the stalls, he spotted Camilla administering medication to the debilitated horse. "How much are we spending monthly on this animal?" he asked abruptly. Camilla stood up, facing him firmly. She was a woman of medium height, tanned skin, and penetrating eyes that were not easily intimidated. "About $2,000 between medications and specific treatments," she answered. "But Thunder is responding well. The inflammation in his His leg has decreased significantly, and he can already support his leg for short periods. $2,000 monthly on a horse that will never run or reproduce again, questioned Matthew with an ironic smile. That's completely irrational. With all due respect, Mr. Wilson, rationality is not the only value to consider when we're talking about living beings, Camilla retorted. This animal dedicated a decade of his life to this ranch, generating profits far superior to what we're investing in his treatment. Doctor, interrupted Matthew with a falsely cordial tone, I think you're confusing things. Horses are investments, not family members. This one is clearly obsolete. I'll give you a week to find a more economical solution. With that, he turned his back and headed toward the main house, leaving Camilla visibly indignant. Samuel, who had witnessed the scene in silence, just shook his head in disapproval. That night, after a few too many drinks, Matthew called Samuel to the office. That black horse, this Thunder, is occupying space and consuming resources that could be better applied, he declared, his voice slightly slurred by alcohol. I want you to get rid of him tomorrow. Get rid of him, sir? Questioned Samuel, visibly uncomfortable. That's right. Sell, donate, do whatever necessary. I just don't want to see that animal here anymore. Samuel cleared his throat, gathering courage. With all due respect, Mr. Matthew, your father gave specific orders about Thunder. He can't be sold or donated. He's like a special asset of the ranch. Matthew laughed with disdain. My father gave me this ranch, Samuel. Now I decide what's an asset and what's a liability. The next morning, without telling anyone, Matthew headed to the stalls, accompanied only by Josh, a newly hired ranch hand who seemed eager to please the new boss. Upon arrival, he found the horse lying down with labored breathing. Let's end this suffering, declared Matthew with false compassion. Bring that horse to the back of the south pasture. Josh hesitated, but obeyed. With difficulty, they managed to get the animal to stand and slowly led it to a remote area of the ranch. Upon arrival, Matthew pointed to a huge anthill that rose like a small red earth mountain. Tie the animal here, he ordered, indicating a stake near the anthill. But, boss, this will, stammered Josh, suddenly pale. It will teach a lesson. To everyone on this ranch, completed Matthew coldly. Nothing is kept here if it doesn't generate profit. Now do what I told you. With trembling hands, Josh tied the horse's front legs to the stake, while the animal emitted weak neighs of protest. Matthew observed the scene with indifference and, satisfied, returned to the main house, leaving the horse at the mercy of the ants that were already beginning to climb up its injured legs. Shortly after lunch, the news spread like wildfire. Employees gathered in small groups, exchanging looks of revolt and indignation. Camilla, upon learning of what happened, confronted Matthew on the porch of the main house. What you did is an environmental crime and animal cruelty, she shouted, with eyes brimming with anger. I'm going to report this right now. Doctor, control yourself, he replied without losing his composure. It's just an old, sick animal, and this ranch is my property. I do what I want here. Not with the animals under my veterinary responsibility, she retorted, pulling out her cell phone. I'm going to call animal control and the veterinary board. Matthew snatched the phone from her hand with a sudden movement. You work for me, remember? One more word about this and you're fired. And good luck finding another job in the region after I tell my version of the story. Camilla turned pale, but did not back down. At least allow me to go there to check the animal's condition. Do what you want, he replied, returning the phone. But remember, one word outside of here, and you'll never work with animals in the state of Texas again. With a heavy heart, Camilla headed to the location where the horse had been left. Upon arrival, she was paralyzed by the scene. The animal was covered with ants, visibly trembling, with eyes injected with pain and dread. She approached slowly, brushing away the insects with her hands and using her jacket to protect the animal's muzzle. "I'll help you, Thunder," she whispered, with tears streaming down her face. "I promise." However, when trying to untie the ropes that bound the horse, she was surprised by Josh, who appeared breathless. "Doctor, I can't let you do that," he said nervously. "The boss will fire me." "Josh, this is torture. How can you go along with something like this?" The ranch hand lowered, his eyes visibly ashamed. "I need this job, doctor. I have 3 young children." Camilla took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. "All right, but at least help me apply this anti-inflammatory ointment on his legs. This won't free him, it will just alleviate some of the suffering." Reluctantly, Josh agreed. While they were treating the animal, they didn't notice a figure observing them from a distance, partially hidden by a thicket. It was an elderly woman, with sun-wrinkled skin and grey hair tied in a low bun, who held a rustic walking stick and murmured inaudible words. At night, a summer storm broke over the region, with lightning cutting the dark sky and thunder that made the windows of the main house tremble. Matthew, who was dining alone, felt a strange uneasiness. For the first time since he arrived, the silence of the ranch seemed oppressive, almost threatening. When day broke, Josh ran to the porch where Matthew was having coffee with the pail, a countenance of someone who had seen a ghost. "Boss, the horse, he's gone." Matthew almost choked on his coffee. "What do you mean, gone? Did you untie him?" "No, sir. I swear on my mother's life I didn't. The ropes, they were cut." As if someone had freed the animal during the night, Matthew stood up abruptly, knocking over the cup. "Whoever did this will regret it," he muttered between his teeth. "Let's go there now." When they reached the location, they found only the cut ropes by the stake. There were no tracks of the horse in any direction, as if it had disappeared into thin air. Even stranger, the Anthill, which before was teeming with activity, now seemed completely abandoned, with small, collapsed tunnels. "This is impossible," muttered Matthew, examining the location. "Someone is going to pay for this insubordination." Upon returning to the main house, he ordered an immediate meeting with all employees. With his face contorted with rage, he demanded that the person responsible come forward, promising immediate dismissal to everyone if no one confessed. A sepulchral silence dominated the environment. No one spoke up. "You have until the end of the day," he threatened, "or I'll start firing one by one, starting with the most recent hires." As the team dispersed, an older ranch hand approached Samuel and whispered something in his ear. The manager turned pale, discreetly making the sign of the cross. "What was that?" questioned Matthew, who was observing everything from a distance. "Nothing, boss," replied Samuel, swallowing hard. "Just gossip." But Matthew realized that something strange was happening. The employees exchanged significant glances, and some avoided certain areas of the ranch as if they feared something invisible. The following week at New Horizon Ranch was marked by increasingly disturbing events. Matthew, determined to discover who had freed the horse, transformed the work environment into an almost dictatorial regime. Security cameras were installed at the main points of the property. Entry and exit times began to be rigorously controlled, and any group conversation was immediately dispersed. Despite all the surveillance, no one confessed to having freed Thunder, and the animal was not found anywhere on the property. Even stranger were the inexplicable behaviors that began to manifest in the other animals on the ranch. On a particularly hot morning, Matthew decided to accompany the breaking-in work of a newly acquired colt. The animal, a young chestnut of prize-winning lineage, had arrived just 3 days earlier and would be prepared for future competitions. Normally docile during initial training, according to reports, the colt showed himself unexpectedly aggressive when Matthew approached. "I've never seen this behavior in him." commented the trainer, trying to calm the animal that neighed and reared up, refusing to allow Matthew to touch it. "He just needs to understand who's in charge here," replied Matthew, picking up a whip hanging on the fence. Before he could use it, however, other horses in nearby stalls began to neigh and stamp their hooves on the ground, creating a disturbing cacophony. The colt took advantage of the distraction and with a sudden movement knocked Matthew into the dust, retreating to the furthest corner of the enclosure. "This is ridiculous," muttered Matthew, getting up and cleaning the dirt from his pants. "They're just coincidences." However, the strange episodes multiplied. The cattle began to disperse when he approached the pastures. Chickens stopped pecking and hid in their roosts. Even the ranch dogs, previously friendly with anyone, growled discreetly when they smelled him. During an inspection along the property boundaries, Samuel drew Matthew's attention to a small cabin, almost hidden among century-old mango trees. "Who lives there?" questioned Matthew, surprised not to have noticed that construction before. Samuel hesitated before answering. "It's Mrs. June. She's lived on this ranch longer than any of us." "And why wasn't she included in the list of employees you presented?" "To me?" "Because technically she's not an employee, sir. Mrs. June has a lifetime right to live here. It was an agreement your grandfather made with her decades ago." Matthew frowned. "Agreement? What kind of agreement?" "The story goes that she saved your grandfather from a serious accident. In gratitude, he offered her lifetime housing and freedom to move around the property, all documented legally." Intrigued and slightly irritated by this discovery, Matthew decided to meet this lady. He approached the cabin, which, despite its rustic appearance from outside, maintained an impeccably tended medicinal garden around it. Before he could knock on the door, it opened, revealing an elderly black woman, with white hair tied in a bun, wearing a simple cotton print dress and a colorful shawl on her shoulders. Her eyes, a brown so deep they seemed black, stared at Matthew with disconcerting intensity. "John Wilson's grandson has finally come to visit me," she said, with a voice surprisingly firm for her age. "Come in, young man." It was about time. Matthew hesitated, uncomfortable with the woman's familiarity, but entered. The interior of the cabin was simple, yet meticulously organized. Herbs dried hanging from the ceiling, shelves displayed glass jars with various contents, and the aroma of fresh herbs permeated the environment. "How did you know I would come?" he asked, refusing with a gesture the wooden bench she offered. "News travels fast around here," replied Mrs. June, sitting down and beginning to separate dried leaves into small piles. "Especially the bad news." Matthew felt his face heat up. "If you're referring to that useless horse, it was better for everyone that he no longer consumed resources." Mrs. June raised her eyes, facing him. "Nothing that is born on this land is useless, young man. Each being has its purpose, even when ignorant eyes cannot see it. Look, ma'am, I didn't come here to listen to cheap philosophy. I just want to understand why a stranger has a lifetime right on my property." The elderly woman smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This land had many owners before you, boy. Some with papers, others with blood. Your grandfather understood that. Your father too, although it took him longer, you will still learn." There was something in the way she spoke that deeply irritated Matthew, a calm certainty that challenged his authority without needing to raise her voice. "I'll review this so-called agreement. Times change, documents can be contested," he threatened, heading toward the door. "You can try," she replied, returning to separating her herbs. "But first, you should ask your father how he felt when he tried to do the same 20 years ago." Matthew left the cabin more disturbed than he would like to admit. There was something about that woman that deeply bothered him. It wasn't fear, but an uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated and somehow disapproved of. That same afternoon, During a video conference with investors interested in expanding the ranch's operations, Matthew was interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard. When he went out to check, he found several employees gathered around Josh's cell phone. "What's happening here?" he asked, irritated by the interruption. The employees quickly dispersed, except for Josh, who seemed paralyzed, his face pale. "Show me that," demanded Matthew, snatching the cell phone from the ranch hand's hands. On the screen, a video clearly showed the moment when he ordered Thunder to be tied next to the anthill. The footage ended with a close-up image of the animal suffering from the bites. "Who did this?" he asked, with his voice trembling with rage. "I don't know, boss," replied Josh, visibly nervous. "I received it in a WhatsApp group. It's already circulating on animal protection networks in the region." Matthew felt his stomach sink. He quickly returned to the office and checked his own cell phone. There were already 5 missed calls from his father and a terse message: "Explain this video, now." In the days that followed, the video spread with frightening speed. Animal defense groups organized virtual protests, tagging the Wilson family's companies and demanding punishment. Local newspapers published articles about the case, and even a regional TV station sent a team to try to interview ranch employees. Matthew, increasingly cornered, ordered that no one speak to the press and hired a crisis management firm to try to control the damage. However, the situation worsened when he discovered that the investors he was negotiating with had backed out, citing incompatibility of values as the official reason. In a desperate attempt to reverse the situation, he organized an official visit with representatives of an animal welfare certification company, believing that a technical inspection could restore the ranch's reputation. He meticulously prepared every detail: clean facilities, well-fed animals, veterinary documentation in order. Samuel, who observed the preparations with skepticism, finally spoke up. "Mr. Matthew, perhaps you should postpone this visit. There's a lot of bad energy circulating around the ranch lately." "Bad energy?" laughed Matthew with disdain. "Don't tell me you also believe in superstitions, Samuel. I thought you were more rational." "It's not superstition, sir. It's respect. This land has history, has memory. What you did with Thunder messed with things that go beyond our understanding. Spare me this country mysticism. We'll proceed with the plan." On the morning of the inspection, Matthew woke up early, personally checked every detail, and mentally rehearsed his speech about commitment to sustainable and ethical practices. When the 3 representatives of the certification company arrived, he received them with a rehearsed smile and purposeful humility. "Our goal is always to improve," he stated, leading them through the office where he would present the documents before the tour of the property. "We greatly value feedback from experts." The initial meeting went without problems. The inspectors, experienced and direct professionals, asked technical questions that Matthew, well prepared, answered with apparent transparency. Soon came the time to visit the facilities. "We'll start with the equine sector, where we recently implemented a new welfare protocol," announced Matthew, guiding the group outside the main house. The sky, previously clear, now showed dark clouds on the horizon, announcing a typical Texas storm. Matthew looked up, concerned about the possibility of rain during the inspection, but decided to proceed. As they approached the horse stalls, he noticed something strange. The animals, normally calm at that time, seemed agitated. Some nervous neighs could be heard, and hooves rhythmically beat against the packed dirt floor. "They seem a little anxious today," commented one of the inspectors, frowning. "Probably because of the weather change," justified Matthew, trying to maintain his composure. "They're sensitive to the drop in pressure before storms." When they were a few meters from the equine area, a dark silhouette emerged from behind a barn. Matthew froze, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. It was Thunder, the horse that had disappeared. The animal, visibly recovered, but still with visible marks from ant bites all over its body, positioned itself directly in the path of the group. Its posture was not threatening, but there was something intensely disturbing in the way its eyes fixed directly on Matthew. "My God, what happened to this animal?" asked one of the inspectors, slowly approaching Thunder. Her trained eyes quickly identified the marks of ant bites and the still debilitated condition of the horse. Matthew felt his blood freeze in his veins. The animal he had practically condemned was there, alive, exactly at the moment of the inspection. It was as if it had been carefully orchestrated to expose him. This horse was under veterinary treatment," he stammered, trying to improvise. "An explanation. He had an allergic reaction to a medication." "Allergic reaction?" questioned another inspector, crouching down to examine the marks on the animal's legs. "This clearly looks like ant bites, and in large quantity." The third member of the team, an older man with decades of experience in animal handling, observed the scene with evident suspicion. "Mr. Wilson, would this by any chance be the horse from the video circulating on social media, the one that was deliberately exposed to an anthill as punishment?" Matthew felt cold sweat run down his spine. How could he deny the obvious? The horse was unmistakable, with its characteristic white mark on the forehead, and the marks of the wounds, still in the healing process, told their own story. "There was an unfortunate incident," he admitted, trying to save what was left of his credibility, "but it was an employee who acted on his own. He has already been duly punished." At that moment, as if to deny his words, Thunder approached more closely, staring directly at him. The other horses in nearby stalls began to neigh and stamp their hooves on the ground, creating a disturbing cacophony. The sky darkened even more, and the first thunder rumbled in the distance. "I believe we cannot continue this inspection," declared the oldest inspector, "not under the current circumstances." "Wait," begged Matthew. "I can explain everything. It was an error in judgment, I admit, but we are implementing significant changes." A voice interrupted his desperate plea. "Some things cannot be explained, young man, only felt and learned." It was Mrs. June, who appeared silently behind the group. In one hand she carried a bucket with fresh water, in the other some herbs. "This is Thunder," she continued, calmly approaching the horse, which lowered its head in her direction. "He was the best stallion on this ranch for many years. When he got sick and old, the new boss decided he no longer deserved to live." Matthew advanced, furious. "You don't have authorization to speak with the inspectors," he shouted, completely losing his composure. Mrs. June smiled serenely while offering water to the horse. "I have authorization to be where animals need me. Your grandfather understood this, and it's legally registered, as your manager must have already explained to you." The inspectors observed the scene, clearly impacted by the contrast between Matthew's aggressive posture and the calm of the elderly woman who, despite her age, demonstrated complete control over the situation and a natural connection with the injured animal. "Ma'am," the female inspector addressed Mrs. June, "could you tell us what happened to this horse?" Before the elderly woman could respond, the sky opened up in an impressive storm. Heavy drops of rain began to punish the group, forcing them to seek shelter in the nearest barn. Thunder, however, remained where he was, as if the rain didn't bother him. Soaked, the inspectors announced that they needed to end the visit. They would leave an extremely unfavorable preliminary report and recommend a more in-depth investigation by the competent authorities. Matthew, seeing his plans crumble, still tried one last appeal. "Please, don't draw hasty conclusions. I take full responsibility for the incident, but the ranch as a whole should not be penalized." "Mr. Wilson," the most experienced inspector coldly replied, "when an animal is deliberately subjected to suffering, we are not talking about an incident, but about systematic cruelty. and that directly reflects the values of the administration. They left the property as soon as the rain decreased, promising to return with authorities for a formal inspection. Matthew remained standing on the porch of the main house, watching the car move away on the now muddy dirt road, feeling that something much larger than his professional reputation had been destroyed that day. The following weeks were devastating. The inspector's report leaked to the press, amplifying the scandal. Animal protection groups organized protests in front of the Wilson family's companies. Corporate clients cancelled contracts, citing ethical concerns. The family company's stocks fell significantly on the stock market. Arnold Wilson, furious with his son, called an emergency meeting with the board and announced Matthew's temporary removal from any executive position. In a private and tense conversation, he made clear his disappointment. It wasn't just money we lost, Matthew. It was trust. It was respect. It was decades of work building a reputation that you destroyed in weeks. Dad, it was just an old, useless horse. Protested Matthew, still unable to comprehend the dimension of his actions. Arnold looked at him with a mixture of anger and sadness. It's exactly because you think like that you're not ready to manage anything, much less a property where lives depend on your decisions. What do you want me to do then? Asked Matthew, between irritated and desperate. Go back to the ranch. Stay away from social media, from the press, from everything, and learn what respect for life is. Learn what real responsibility is, not this facade you've built, or else forget you have a father. The ultimatum was clear. Reluctantly and humiliated, Matthew returned to New Horizon Ranch 2 weeks later, no longer as the arrogant owner, but as a man in disgrace, avoided by society and by his own family. The reception at the ranch was cold. The employees kept their distance, limiting themselves to formal and necessary greetings. Samuel, who had temporarily assumed the administration by Arnold's order, received him with distant professionalism. Your father gave specific instructions, informed the manager. You should familiarize yourself with all aspects of the operation, starting with the basic work. Tomorrow morning, Josh will show you the daily tasks of the corral. Matthew, who expected to at least maintain some privileges, was shocked. You telling me I'm going to work as a common ranch hand? I'm telling you that you're going to learn how this ranch really works, sir, from the ground up, not from the top down. That night, alone in the room he previously occupied as the lord of the property, Matthew felt the complete weight of his fall. His cell phone, previously constantly active with messages from friends and business contacts, now remained silent. Social media, where he previously displayed his privileged life, was now filled with criticism and memes about the cruel heir. Even his longtime girlfriend had distanced herself, concerned about the damage to her own image. The next day, he was awakened before dawn by Josh, who knocked firmly on the door. Time to start, sir, announced the ranch hand, without the submissive respect of before. We have a lot of work ahead. The first weeks were brutal. Hands that had never known heavy work now presented blisters and calluses. Skin previously protected from the sun now burned under the relentless Texas heat. Muscles unaccustomed to physical effort constantly ached. Matthew tried to complain to Samuel, arguing that this type of treatment was humiliating and unnecessary. The manager simply handed him a letter written by Arnold himself, where the father made it clear that this was the path to redemption, not just of the public image, but of character. The letter ended with a phrase that hammered in Matthew's mind for days. A man who does not respect the pain of others will never understand the value of compassion. And without compassion, son, you will never be truly rich, no matter how many zeros you have in your bank account. The first time Matthew crossed paths with Thunder after his return was especially difficult. The horse, now housed in a comfortable, stall and receiving daily treatment, seemed to observe him with a disturbing intensity. There wasn't fear in the animal's eyes, nor anger, just a kind of silent understanding that disturbed Matthew more than any hostile reaction could. Camilla, the veterinarian, personally supervised the horse's recovery and initially refused to allow Matthew to approach. "He has suffered enough because of you," she declared, protectively placing herself between the man and the animal. "The last thing he needs now is more stress." With the passing of weeks, however, the dynamic began to change subtly. The daily work, although exhausting, provided Matthew with a connection to the land and animals that he had never experienced before. He began to notice previously invisible details, the way cattle communicated through almost imperceptible signals, the complex social hierarchy among the horses, the natural rhythms that governed life on the ranch. One afternoon, while helping to clean the horse stalls, a task he would previously have considered unworthy, he realized that Mrs. June was silently observing him. "What are you looking at?" he asked defensively. "I'm seeing a man beginning to be born," she replied with an enigmatic smile before slowly moving away, supported by her walking stick. That phrase, apparently simple, deeply disturbed Matthew. It was as if the elderly woman could see something inside him that even he hadn't yet perceived, a change that was occurring slowly, like seeds sprouting in previously sterile soil. A Sunday morning, after almost 2 months of hard work on the ranch, Matthew was surprised by a visit. Camilla, the veterinarian, appeared at his door right after breakfast. "I need your help," she said without preamble. "Thunder is having difficulties with the new treatment, and I need someone to hold him while I apply the medication." Matthew hesitated. Since his return to the ranch, he had avoided any direct contact with the horse he had mistreated. "Why me? Can't you ask Josh or any other ranch hand?" "Because it needs to be you," replied Camilla, with a firmness that admitted no contestation. "It's part of the process, for him and for you." Reluctantly, Matthew followed her to the stall where Thunder was housed. The animal, upon seeing him, retreated slightly, its ears moving nervously. "Approach slowly," instructed Camilla. "Maintain eye contact, but not in a threatening way. Let him smell you." With his heart racing, Matthew obeyed. He felt a mixture of fear and shame when facing the animal he had condemned to cruel suffering. To his surprise, after a few moments of tension, Thunder visibly relaxed, allowing him to approach. "Hold him like this," showed Camilla, carefully placing Matthew's hands on the horse's neck. Firm, but gentle. While the veterinarian applied the medication to the leg still in recovery, Matthew experienced a strange sensation. Under his fingers, he could feel the animal's pulse, the texture of the hair, the warmth of the skin. It was a physical connection that awakened something primitive, almost forgotten in his urbanized being, distant from nature. "Why isn't he reacting badly to me?" he asked, confused. "After what I did." Camilla finished the procedure before answering. "Animals, especially horses, live in the present. They don't hold grudges like we humans do, which doesn't mean they forget." She stored the equipment in her veterinary bag. "Thunder is giving you a second chance, something you didn't offer him." The words hit Matthew with unexpected force. He remained there, lightly caressing the horse's neck, feeling an unknown emotion grow in his chest, something between regret and gratitude. In the days that followed, he began to visit Thunder regularly. At first, just for a few minutes, helping with medications or simply observing him. Gradually, the visits became longer. He began to bring carrots and apples, taking the opportunity to talk to the animal in a low voice, as if it could understand him. "I never thought I'd see this," commented Josh one afternoon, finding Matthew patiently brushing Thunder's coat. "You've really changed." "I'm still changing," replied Matthew, surprising himself with the sincerity of the confession, and I still have a lot to learn. The daily work continued to be hard, but it no longer seemed like a punishment. He had discovered a strange satisfaction in completed tasks, in problems solved with his own hands, in seeing the tangible results of his effort. The ranch, which he previously viewed only as a financial asset, now revealed itself as a complex and fascinating organism full of cycles, relationships, and interdependencies. On a particularly hot afternoon, while helping to repair a damaged fence on the property boundary, he spotted Mrs. June collecting wild herbs near a stream. Driven by a curiosity he didn't possess before, he approached her. "What are you collecting?" he asked, observing the diverse plants that she carefully separated into a straw basket. "Medicines," replied the elderly woman without interrupting her work. "Nature provides everything we need if we know how to look. For the animals, for all of us, humans, animals, the earth itself." She raised her eyes, studying him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances. "You're beginning to understand that, aren't you?" Matthew nodded, feeling strangely exposed before. "This woman, can I help?" he offered hesitantly. Mrs. June smiled, the first genuine smile she directed at him. "You can. I need that plant over there, the one with yellow flowers, but just the flowers. Leave the root intact so it grows back next season." For the next 2 hours, Matthew helped the healer collect different medicinal plants, learning their names, properties, and uses. It was ancestral knowledge passed through generations that no formal school could ever teach. "My grandfather trusted you a lot, didn't he?" he asked as they returned to the ranch. John Wilson was a man who knew how to recognize value beyond money, she confirmed. "When all the doctors in the city abandoned him, it was my herbs that kept him alive for another 10 years. Matthew felt a pang of shame as he realized how he had initially despised this woman and her knowledge, judging them primitive and irrelevant. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you when I arrived here," he said, surprising himself with the sincere apology. Mrs. June stopped walking, facing him seriously. "It's not me you owe apologies to, young man. It's yourself for having lived so long disconnected from what really matters." That conversation marked a turning point for Matthew. In the weeks that followed, he began to regularly visit Mrs. June's cabin, learning about medicinal herbs, natural cycles, and the ancient wisdom she carried. He discovered that the elderly woman not only cared for injured animals, but also attended to people from the region with her remedies and advice. "Why do you do all this?" he asked once, watching her prepare an ointment for a horse with wounds on its legs. "Most of these people can barely pay." "I do it because I can," she replied simply. "Because I have the knowledge and the hands. Refusing help when you have the capacity to offer it is the true poverty, young man." Those words remained with Matthew, echoing in his mind during the working days. He began to realize that his previous life, despite all the material privileges, had been spiritually impoverished. The constant accumulation, the incessant competition, the need to display status, everything now seemed terribly empty. One morning, upon arriving to help with Thunder's treatment, he found Camilla visibly worried. "He had a relapse during the night," explained the veterinarian. "The inflammation in his hindquarters came back, and he's refusing food." Matthew felt an unexpected anguish. In the last few months, he had developed a genuine bond with the animal. The idea of seeing him suffer again was unbearable. "What can we do?" he asked with sincere urgency in his voice. "Medically, I'm already doing everything possible," replied Camilla, "but there are limits to what conventional medicine can offer in cases like this." Without hesitation, Matthew headed to Mrs. June's cabin. He found her already preparing a mixture of herbs, as if expecting his visit. "I know," she said, before he even explained the reason for his presence. Thunder will need special care tonight." Together they returned to the stall, where the horse remained lying down, breathing with difficulty. Mrs. June applied her preparation to the inflamed legs and offered an herbal infusion that the animal surprisingly accepted to drink. "Now we need to stay with him," declared the elderly woman, "all night." And so they did. Matthew, Mrs. June, and Camilla took turns in shifts, monitoring the animal, applying compresses, offering fresh water, and in Matthew's case, simply remaining by the horse's side, speaking softly as if his words could comfort it. When the sun rose, Thunder managed to stand. Still with difficulty, but visibly better, he walked a few steps to where Matthew was and rested his muzzle on his shoulder in a gesture that seemed one of gratitude. "He knows who stayed with him all night," observed Mrs. June. At that moment, something crystallized in Matthew's mind, a certainty that had been slowly forming over the past few months. The ranch, which he initially viewed as mere financial asset, now revealed its true value, an ecosystem where each life mattered, where relationships of mutual respect created something much greater than the sum of its parts. During breakfast, he surprised Samuel with a proposal. "I want to transform part of the ranch into a sanctuary for rescued animals, especially horses," he announced. "Use our structure and knowledge to rehabilitate mistreated or abandoned animals." The manager stared at him in amazement. "It's a noble proposal, Mr. Matthew, but financially, I don't know if your father would approve." "I'm not talking about abandoning production," explained Matthew, "just diversifying our operations, using a portion of the land for something that really makes a difference. We can even create an equine therapy program for special needs children in the region." The transformation didn't happen overnight. There was resistance, questioning, necessary adjustments. Arnold Wilson, initially skeptical, visited the ranch to personally verify the changes in his son and on the property. "Are you really committed to this?" he asked, as they watched Thunder grazing peacefully in a verdant field, almost completely recovered. "I am, Dad," replied Matthew with a conviction that surprised the patriarch. "Perhaps for the first time in my life, I'm really committed to something bigger than myself." 6 months after the infamous crisis, New Horizon Ranch officially inaugurated its equine sanctuary, an area of over 100 acres dedicated to the recovery and care of horses rescued from situations of mistreatment or abandonment. The first official resident was, symbolically, Thunder. The initiative attracted positive media coverage, gradually reversing the negative image associated with the Wilson name. Animal protection organizations, previously harsh critics, became partners. Universities showed interest in developing animal welfare research at the facilities. On a particularly significant afternoon, Matthew received a visit from a group of children with different special needs, inaugurating the equine therapy program. Seeing the joy on the children's faces, the immediate connection they established with the recovered animals was a deeply transformative experience. "These children and these horses have a lot in common," commented Mrs. June, who supervised the program along with specialized professionals. "Both faced challenges that made them more sensitive, more aware, and stronger," completed Matthew, observing how Thunder, now the gentlest horse in the sanctuary, patiently allowed a girl with cerebral palsy to caress him. That night, alone on the porch of the main house, Matthew reflected on the incredible journey of the past few months. The arrogant young man who had arrived at that ranch, seeing only numbers and profits, was unrecognizable. In his place, a man was emerging who was beginning to understand the value of respect, compassion, and the interconnection between all beings. His cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from his father, with a link to a special report about the equine sanctuary of New Horizon Ranch, highlighting Matthew Wilson's personal transformation and the positive impact of the initiative. The message simply said, "Proud of you, son. Your grandfather would be too." Those words, which before he would have received with calculated indifference, now touched something deep in his being. It wasn't just his father's approval that mattered, but the feeling of finally being on the right path, of living with purpose and meaning. From the nearby stable, he heard Thunder's soft neigh, as if the animal was also celebrating this new phase. Matthew smiled, recognizing the irony of fate. The horse he had tried to destroy, because he considered it useless, was precisely the one who saved him from an empty and predatory existence. "Thank you," he whispered to the starry Texas night, knowing that his gratitude extended far beyond that specific animal. It encompassed Mrs. June, Camilla, the ranch workers, the very land that he now learned to respect and honor. As he observed the star-studded sky, so much more visible there, in the countryside than in the polluted city he previously called home, Matthew felt a deep peace. New Horizon Ranch had indeed provided a new horizon in his life, not just for the rescued animals, but for his own spirit, previously lost in superficiality and now finding deep roots in true values. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Matthew Wilson and the horse Thunder has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions and transformations, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about redemption and connection with nature. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you like this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the paths to true transformation. Don't miss our upcoming content. We await you in the comments to know what touched your hearts most in this story of rebirth in the heart of the Texas countryside.